Welcome back. My name is Katie, and I'm an instructor at the Tutorium in Intensive English. This is our second pronunciation module. If you did not hear our first module, I do suggest that you go back and listen. It talks about consonants, vowels, and syllables in English, and will be very helpful for this module. Now today, our topic is syllable stress. So in English, syllables, right, like we talked about in our last module, syllables are beats in a word. So we've thought about music and language being connected, and every language has its own music. And so those syllables, every word has a certain number of beats, right? And we call those syllables. But what is stress in a syllable? Well, there are to talk about music a little bit more, music and language, every language has its own rhythm, right? And so the stressed syllables create the rhythm of English. Now in English, not all syllables are equal. Some are more emphasized than others. Some are completely unemphasized. And this alternation of stressed and unstressed syllables creates the sound that we are used to when we hear English. So how do we do this? How do we emphasize a syllable? Well, there are three things: pitch, volume, and length. And pitch might be kind of a hard concept at first for us to grasp, but it's connected to that music again, right? So pitch is just an increase in the quality of the sound. So the quality of the sound like goes up. It's a little bit different than volume. It's not just that it's louder, it's that it actually rises kind of like, and then the volume also increases and the syllable length is longer. So this creates syllable stress. This is what we're talking about when we talk about that in English and other languages too. So let's take a moment and just think about why stress is important. Why are we doing this module? Why is this topic something that we care about? Let's talk about three things. So in our last module, we talked about what our goals are for these modules. And everybody has their own personal goals, but my goal for you is not to make you sound like a native speaker. I don't think that that is necessary. I think that the most important thing is that we are clear speakers, right? The other thing, listener expectations. When you are listening to your native language as a native speaker of that language, your brain and your mind has a certain expectation. You are already ready to receive a certain type of message. And when you don't get the message that you're expecting, it can take your brain a little bit longer to process that message. So my goal for us is to help you be a clearer speaker, and by making you a clearer speaker, bring you a little bit closer to those English listener expectations. If your message is closer to what your listener is expecting, there'll be fewer communication breakdowns. And this will make you have more confidence, which is the most important thing when you're speaking any language, especially a language that isn't your native language. You want to feel confident, right? It makes you a better speaker. So this is why this is important. This is why we're worried about stress. Okay, on to the next thing. So today in our module, we're going to talk about 3 levels of syllable stress in English: syllables with primary stress, syllables with secondary stress, and syllables with completely reduced stress. Now, if you're stressing out and you're like, what does all this stress mean? Don't worry. We're going to get into some details in the next few slides. Let's start with primary stress. And just like the name makes us think, this is the most important syllable in the word. It's primary. It is the highest and strongest pitch of all the syllables in that word. The vowel in this syllable will be the longest vowel sound in the word. And the syllable that has primary stress will also be a little louder than all of the other syllables in the word. So let's start with one syllable words, okay? Because we know if a word only has one syllable, that syllable has primary stress. So just a note about primary stress, every word has a syllable that has primary stress, and there is only one syllable in a word that will have primary stress. A word will never have two syllables that both have equal stress, okay? So we have our three words, jail, pray, and folks. These are words from our module, this week's module. Okay, so the first word, jail. And when I do syllable stress, when I'm practicing with my students in my class, I like to have a rubber band or something that can help them visualize the stress, right? So that it's not just in our head, but also we're doing something with our body to connect what we're doing with our mouth and our brain to our body in some way. So if you have a rubber band, that can be a great tool. And if you don't have a rubber band, it's really easy to pretend like you do. Okay, so I've got my rubber band here. And the other thing that's really important when you're practicing at home, when you're practicing pronunciation of any kind, is to go big, right? They say go big or go home, because you have to feel it, right? So don't be embarrassed to, go jail. That's what I make my students do in class. Jail. Really feel that length of the syllable, okay? Our next word, pray. You can really stretch that out with your rubber band. Pray. Okay. And our last word, we got all of our, so again, if you didn't see the last module, it'll be very helpful to go back and look at that, because these symbols that you're seeing, they're covered in that module. Okay, our last word, folks. Folks. You'll notice that we don't say that L sound in that word, folks. It's one of my favorite words. Means instead of saying, hey, you guys, or hey, people, you're like, hey, folks, what's going on? So let's talk about secondary stress. Secondary stress is also a strong sound in a word, but it's not the strongest. It's just like the name implies, it's secondary. There is increased pitch, length, and volume, just like with primary stress, but these elements are less intense than the primary stressed syllable. Now remember, there's only ever one primary stressed syllable. There may or may not be a syllable with secondary stress. This is optional, right? Not all words have a syllable that receives secondary stress. The longer the word, so the more syllables you have, the more likely that you're going to have a syllable with secondary stress, right? More syllables make things more complicated, but don't stress. Okay, so all of these three words, they have a syllable that has secondary and primary stress, plus some reduced syllables as well. So we can see everything in purple is secondary, everything in red is primary, and the other syllables are reduced. All right, so let's practice this with our rubber band, okay? I'm gonna make so you can see my hands and my mouth. So we say information. So I do pronounce that first syllable a little more strongly than some of the reduced syllables. In information, but I really lengthen that third syllable. Information. Information, okay? And academic, we can see the first syllable receives secondary stress and the third syllable receives primary stress. And you can kind of feel when you make that first vowel, there's some tension in your face, right? So that's why there's that stress there. Academic. but I'm only going to stretch my rubber band on my, you could stretch, you could stretch your rubber band on the first syllable, but make it smaller. Academic. That way you can kind of feel the different, length and duration of each vowel. The first vowel, not quite as long. Academic. Really stretch that third syllable. Last word. It's the long one. Subsequently. Okay. Subsequently. Subsequently. So just quently, just a little, it's secondary. Subsequently. All right. So those are our secondary, primary stress, and everything's getting a little complicated, right? Because they're all mixed together. So our last group of syllable type is reduced stressed syllables, syllables that are not stressed at all. And the vowel sound is usually the schwa, which is the right? The most common vowel sound in English. That kind of our tongue is on the bottom of our mouth, not doing a whole lot. And there are some other unstressed vowels as well as schwa. We won't worry about those too much right now. They're not long, they're not loud. And you can actually try and maybe speed up the pronunciation of these syllables a little bit to help them seem shorter and the other syllables longer. These are harder than they seem, right? You think, well, I don't have to pay attention to that syllable. But you have to actively give them less attention, and that can be really difficult, especially if you are coming from a first language that gives equal stress to most syllables. It can be really hard to de-stress some. So let's practice with these 3 words that are from module 1, right? These are from our last module. So we have the word neglect. Now, all of these words don't have any secondary stress, right? They're only 2 syllables, so if a word only has 2 syllables, you're probably not going to have secondary stress. You're going to have a primary stress syllable and then a reduced syllable. So the first syllable in neglect is just n and schwa. N. N. Just say that with me. N. Say it short. N. Just like don't give it a lot of attention. Neglect. And then really stretch. Neglect. Really exaggerate it. I know you're like, oh, this feels weird. But I promise you, the more exaggerated your practice, the more you'll feel it and the more it will work its way into your regular speech. Okay, trust me. Okay, our next word, 2 syllables again. First syllable, unstressed, completely reduced. Achieve. Achieve. So almost nothing on the first syllable and then really stretch that second syllable. Achieve. Okay. And our last word, gardener. Now, when you look this word up in the dictionary, technically it looks like it has 3 syllables, but we only pronounce 2 of them. Okay. So we say gardener. Gardener. Try it with me. Gardener. Great. Doing a great job. All right. So let's review the things I want you to remember as you're going through the practice for this week and in the future when you get your rubber band out at home and you're practicing with new vocabulary words. Stress creates the rhythm of English. That's why it's important. Hey, you may not be perfect right away, but just keep practicing. Getting ahead of myself. Second, we're trying to meet listener expectations. We're trying to approximate listener expectations. We don't have to sound exactly like them or like a native speaker, but the closer we get to what a person is expecting, the easier the communication will be, okay? And again, you don't need to sound like me. You don't need to sound like your favorite movie star or whoever you watch on television. You just have to sound like you and just practice at it to be clearer and more confident, okay? And that is my very last point. Practice, practice, practice. Get a rubber band. You can also, stand up and go up on your tiptoes during the stress syllable. I kind of sometimes in class have my students kind of go like this on their tiptoes. So there's a lot of ways, but make pronunciation physical. Whenever you can, make that mouth, mind, body connection, because it will help you feel that inside and internalize that. Okay, so this is my advice. Thank you so much for joining me again for this module. I can't wait to see you again next time, and make sure that you're practicing your syllable stress. All right, have a great day.